My name is Marielle Rayfield. At least, that's what I've answered to for 32 years. I'm 35 now, and if anyone asked me to describe myself, I'd probably say I'm quiet, hardworking, the sort of person who blends into a room. That's what a lifetime of being treated like help instead of family does to you. You learn to shrink, to keep your head down, to earn your keep with silence. My earliest memories in the Rayfield house aren't of bedtime stories or birthday cakes. They're of scrubbing floors on my knees while Colton and Bridget tore through Christmas wrapping paper in the living room. Every year, Patricia, the woman I called Mother, sat in her armchair and told me to keep the dishes moving, as though December 25th were no different from any other workday. I thought I was adopted. That was the story they repeated, some charity case their church had pressured them into taking. I swallowed it whole because children don't question the only truth they're given. Now Vernon, the man I called Father, lay in a polished coffin at the Cathedral of St. John in Savannah. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting jewel tones over rows of mourners who whispered about what a good man he'd been. I stood at the back, uninvited to sit with the family, hands folded like a servant waiting for instructions. That's when I noticed him, a man in a charcoal suit who looked wildly out of place among the farmers and church ladies. He held a folder tight to his chest, eyes fixed on me as though I were the only person in the cathedral. When the service ended and the crowd began to shuffle out, he stepped into my path. Marielle Rayfield. His voice trembled, though he already seemed to know the answer. I nodded, throat dry. "You're not adopted," he said quietly. "You were kidnapped." From his folder, he drew a brittle newspaper clipping. A 5-year-old girl's face stared back at me. My own face, younger but unmistakable. Below the headline, "Reward rises to $84 million. The cathedral bells tolled, and for the first time in my life, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The man's hand shook as he slid the clipping closer, as if he were offering me something sacred. I stared at it, heart hammering. The little girl in the grainy black and white photograph had my eyes. The same pale green I'd been mocked for my entire life. "You don't look like us, Marielle," Patricia would say, almost proud of the distance. "I'm Winston Hale," he said softly. "Private investigator. I've been following this case for nearly 3 decades. His voice carried both exhaustion and conviction, the kind you only hear from someone who's given up years to a single promise. The clipping trembled in my hands. Boston Park, 1994. 5-year-old girl vanishes without trace. Family offers reward. Below it, a second article yellowed with age reward climbs to $84 million. Around us, the funeral moved forward like theater. The choir's hymn swelled. The pastor's voice rose, praising Vernon Rayfield as a pillar of faith and fatherhood. People dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs. Heads bowed as though holiness itself lay in that coffin. I felt sick. My father, no. The man I called Father was being canonized while I stood at the back. Proof of everything he'd stolen. I whispered, "This isn't possible." "It is," Winston replied, lowering his voice until it was almost a plea. "You are not Marielle Rayfield. Your name is Marielle Thorne. Your mother never stopped searching." My mouth went dry. Thorne. The name felt heavy, foreign, yet disturbingly right. Movement caught my eye at the front. Patricia rose with Colton and Bridget, ready to follow the pallbearers. Her veil shadowed her face, but for the briefest moment her gaze cut through the distance and landed on me. Not grief, not surprise recognition, and something colder. She knew. She had always known. The organ thundered as Vernon's casket began its slow procession down the aisle. The townspeople leaned closer, murmuring their reverence, a community woven into the story the Rayfields had crafted. And I stood frozen, holding a stranger's documents that threatened to unravel it all. Winston touched my arm gently. "This is only the beginning," he murmured. And as Patricia's stare burned into me, I believed him. We stepped outside into the savannah heat, the cathedral bells still echoing across the square. The city looked unchanged cobblestone streets, moss-draped oaks, tourists snapping photos of horse-drawn carriages. But for me, everything tilted. Winston kept a careful distance as we walked, speaking low, as though the air itself might betray us. Vernon Rayfield worked construction in Boston back in the early 90s. He began Beacon Hill Park, playground renovations. That's where you disappeared. His jaw tightened. 2 months later, he quit, bought a townhouse here in Savannah outright. $90,000 in cash. I stopped. Vernon never had money like that. Not legally. Winston said, "Your disappearance was headline news. The FBI chased leads across the country, but the adoption papers Vernon filed in Georgia looked clean. Sheriff Henley Patricia's cousin signed off. They buried the truth." My throat closed. It sounded impossible, yet too precise to dismiss. "So you're telling me my whole life is paperwork and lies?" Winston studied me. "I'm telling you your life was stolen." Something inside me cracked. Images rose unbidden. Like flickers of light through shutters, a pair of red rain boots splashing in puddles, a voice humming a lullaby about a mockingbird, warm hands braiding my hair. They came and went so quickly I almost doubted them, but they felt truer than the years of scrubbing floors and being told I was lucky for scraps. I pressed my fingers to my temples. "I don't know what's real anymore." "That's normal," he said gently. "Memories fade when you're young, but fragments survive. They matter." I wanted to laugh, to shove him away, to demand he stop rewriting the only story I knew, yet a hunger stirred beneath the fear, a longing I'd buried for decades. What if there had been someone who wanted me all along, someone who searched while I scrubbed dishes and called strangers family? Winston paused at the curb, meeting my eyes. "We'll need DNA, quietly. Until then, you act normal. No confrontation. If Patricia suspects you know, she could destroy evidence." "Can you do that?" The thought of returning to Patricia's house made me nauseous, but I nodded. For the first time, obedience wasn't about survival, it was about buying time for the truth. Sunday came with the same humid weight Savannah always carried in August. For 30 years, Sundays had meant silence. Patricia never once asked me to join the family meal after church. I was expected to serve and vanish, not sit. That morning, though, she appeared in the hardware store where I worked, dressed in her black morning dress as if the funeral hadn't ended days before. "Marielle," she said, voice low, clipped. "I've been thinking. With Vernon gone, perhaps it's time we acted more like a proper family. Come to dinner tonight." The words hit harder than any command she'd given me as a child. Patricia didn't extend invitations, she issued orders. Still, there was something in her tone I'd never heard before. Not warmth. Calculation. "I'll check my shift," I murmured, pretending to be uncertain. She leaned closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. I found some old papers in Vernon's desk, adoption records. It would be a shame if they were misplaced. Her smile was thin, a blade hidden in silk. I forced a nod, masking the jolt of fear. She knew something, or at least suspected. That evening, I walked up the steps of the Rayfield townhouse, my phone tucked inside my cardigan pocket with the voice recorder already running. For once, I wasn't just enduring, I was preparing. If Patricia wanted to play games with documents, I needed proof of my own. Inside, the table was set with china we only used for guests. Colton and Bridget sat stiffly, eyes sliding toward me, confused by my presence in a chair instead of hovering by the kitchen. Patricia carved the roast with practiced grace, talking of neighbors bringing casseroles, the church ladies praising Vernon's generosity. Her words sounded rehearsed, designed for a script no one had asked her to recite. Between bites, her eyes flicked to me. Family is fragile. Marielle, if the wrong people start digging in the past, everything can collapse. I smiled politely. swallowing bitterness with my food. Every second I sat there, I felt the recorder capturing her veiled threats, her careful performance. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the maid at her table, I was a witness. The mask pressed tighter, but beneath it, the truth was taking shape. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as the cicadas started their chorus outside my apartment window. Winston's voice was steady, but I heard the tremor beneath it. The results are in, 99.97%. You're Eleanor Thorne's daughter. For a moment, the words didn't land. They hung between us, shimmering and unreal. Then they crashed down, scattering everything I thought I knew. My life with the Rayfields hadn't been adoption, it had been abduction. The ache in my chest was both joy and grief-joy that someone had wanted me all along. Grief for the 3 decades lost. Tomorrow morning, Winston said. The FBI moves on Patricia. Don't go near the house. Just let us handle it. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights off, watching shadows creep along the wall, counting the hours until dawn. When it came, it arrived in the form of black SUVs gliding down Gaston Street, engines hushed but full of intent. I stayed half a block away, leaning against the brick corner of a coffee shop, my hands trembling inside my sleeves. Agents in dark jackets moved with precision. 2 approached the front door, others spread around the townhouse, surrounding it like a net. Patricia's curtains twitched. She opened the door in her housecoat, a mug of coffee in her hand. For one absurd second, she looked like any grieving widow. Then the cuffs snapped shut around her wrists. Colton and Bridget appeared behind her, faces pale, confusion giving way to horror as agents filed past them. Boxes emerged from the house ledgers bound in leather, stacks of cash sealed in plastic bags, photographs burned at the edges but not fully destroyed. Evidence, piece by piece, of a life stolen and buried under lies. From my corner, I felt my knees weaken. Relief surged, but it was tangled with grief so heavy it bent me in half. 30 years of servitude couldn't be erased by handcuffs and ledgers. And yet, as Patricia was guided into the waiting car, her eyes lifted and found me. For the first time, the power between us shifted. She knew I was no longer hers to command. The sun broke fully over Savannah's rooftops, lighting the street in a way I had never seen before. The regional airport felt smaller than ever that evening, its single terminal buzzing with delayed flights and restless travelers. I stood by the arrival gate with Winston at my side, heart hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. Every second stretched thin, filled with the fear that this, too, might vanish, that the woman waiting on the other side of the glass was another dream I'd have to bury. Then I saw her. Eleanor Thorne descended the narrow steps of a private plane, one hand on the railing as though steadying herself against years that had worn her body but not her spirit. She was thinner than the photographs Winston had shown me, hair streaked with silver, but her posture held a kind of quiet ferocity. When her eyes met mine, everything else blurred. They were the same green as mine, the very color Patricia had mocked, the feature that had marked me as different. Eleanor's gaze was wet, trembling, but certain. I didn't realize I was moving until I was already across the gate, my feet carrying me forward like they'd been waiting 30 years for this single command. She reached me, her perfume soft and familiar, and suddenly I remembered. A night long ago, a woman humming a lullaby as I pressed my face into her shoulder. That scent, that song, a fragment, but enough. She touched my face with both hands, hesitant, as if afraid I might shatter. "My baby," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the words. "My beautiful girl." I collapsed into her arms before I could think, letting the sobs tear through me. For the first time in decades, I felt small in a way that wasn't humiliating but safe. Later, As we sat in a quiet corner of the terminal, Eleanor showed me a photograph of a bedroom frozen in time. My bedroom. The walls painted pale yellow, shelves lined with books, a small bed with a quilt tucked neatly. "It's the same as the day you disappeared," she said softly. "I couldn't change it. I couldn't give up on you." Her fingers squeezed mine. "I don't need you to call me Mom today, or ever, unless you choose. I only need you to know you're loved. Always." Her words wrapped around me, both terrifying and healing. I had spent my life surviving conditions, earning scraps. Now love stood in front of me, asking nothing. The interrogation room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, from behind the one-way glass. I watched Patricia sit at the table, wrists chained to a metal loop. She looked smaller without her church hat and pearls, her hair pinned back hastily, her hands trembling. Yet, when she spoke, her voice still carried that familiar sharpness. "It was Vernon," she said finally. After hours of silence, her words were flat, as if she were reciting a grocery list. "He saw the girl in the park. The nanny was distracted. He took her. The agent across from her didn't move." "You mean Marielle?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "We meant to ask for ransom, enough to clear debts, start fresh. But the story blew up. The reward kept climbing. $84 million. We couldn't give her back then. The casual cruelty of it hollowed me. To her, I'd been currency, not a child." "And so you raised her as your maid," the agent pressed. Patricia's lips curled in a bitter half-smile. "We gave her food, a roof, more than some children get. She should be grateful." My stomach turned, for Patricia. Deprivation had become justification when Colton and Bridget were brought in later. They couldn't meet my eyes. Bridget broke first, collapsing into tears, her hands covering her face. "I thought she was adopted," she whispered. "I didn't know. Not really. I just believed what they told us." Colton stayed rigid, arms crossed, his voice sharp. "We were kids. What were we supposed to do? It wasn't our fault." His words carried more defense than remorse, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He had known something was wrong. News spread quickly through Savannah. At Sunday service, the pews buzzed with disbelief. The same elders who had praised Vernon's charity now sat pale and shaken, the myth of generosity crumbling in their hands. The Rayfields, saints of the community, were revealed as thieves who had built their lives on a stolen child. I watched it all from the back row, the same place I had stood for decades, but this time no one looked at me like a servant. They looked at me as proof. Proof of lies, of silence, of a town too willing to believe what it wanted to believe. The wheels of justice turned slowly, nothing like the clean finales on television. There were hearings, continuances, lawyers circling like hawks. Patricia appeared in court each time with her chin lifted, as though she could still command the room with posture alone. The charges were heavy kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and though her lawyers tried to carve a path through plea bargains, the evidence was a fortress. Months passed before sentencing. I sat behind Eleanor the day the judge spoke the words 25 years in federal prison, at 70. It was a life sentence. Patricia showed no remorse. Only once did she turn her head toward me, her eyes flashing with something between hatred and fear, as if I were the one who had stolen her life. Afterward, Boston became my new rhythm. Eleanor didn't smother me. She gave me space, though she never let me drift far, twice a week. I met with Dr. Martinez, a therapist who specialized in survivors of long-term abduction. We started with simple truths: my name, my age, the difference between memory and conditioning. Piece by piece, I learned that survival skills weren't flaws, they were proof I'd endured. The trust fund my father had established waited for me, more than $40 million grown quietly over the decades. But the money felt abstract, almost dangerous. I wasn't ready to be carried by it. Instead, I enrolled in night classes at a community college, Studying business basics before I even considered stepping near the family company. I wanted to earn something on my own. However small, Sundays became something new. Not the brittle silence of Savannah dinners, not the performances for church guests. Now, Eleanor and I sat at a modest table in her townhouse kitchen, sharing roast chicken or soup she insisted on making herself. Sometimes we talked about my father, sometimes we said almost nothing at all. What mattered was the choice. I wasn't ordered to serve, or told to disappear. I stayed because I wanted to. Each dinner stitched another seam in the torn fabric of my life. Slowly, I was learning how to be Marielle again, not the maid in someone else's story, but a daughter in my own. The Savannah townhouse stood hollow by the time I returned, its windows shuttered, curtains stripped, the front garden already choking with weeds. Federal signs warned that the property was under seizure, but Winston had arranged for me to walk through one last time. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the faint scent of polish and mildew. My steps echoed differently now. I wasn't a servant scurrying in silence, but a woman reclaiming ground. I walked past the grand dining room where I had once hovered with plates, past the parlor where Patricia entertained her church friends. My feet carried me to the door off the garage, the place that had been my room. The storage walls were bare, the cot gone, only dust and the ghost of winters when I could see my breath in the dark. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway, remembering the girl who had endured here, Marie. The name they forced on me. She had survived loneliness, cruelty, and silence. She had kept me alive until truth could find me. From my pocket, I pulled a length of red ribbon. I tied it around the doorknob. A quiet tribute, not for the Rayfields, but for the version of me who endured what they built. Then I turned away and left the house behind. Weeks later, in Boston, Eleanor announced that the $84 million reward fund would be donated to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Her voice shook with conviction as she said, "Other families are still searching. This money will help them bring their children home." For once, I didn't feel like the sum of a bounty. I felt like someone worth more than numbers. That evening, I opened a box Eleanor had kept safe. Inside lay my red rain boots, small and scuffed with childhood. I lifted them gently and set them on a shelf in my apartment. They weren't relics of grief anymore. They were proof that I had survived and that I had been found.